So we're back. This morning, can you hear? I wanted to approach the practice of Chenrezig in a slightly different way. It's actually not different at all for those of you who are familiar with it, I think. But the way that we do it a little different, hopefully, therefore, will be a little more user-friendly to the uninitiated. Like the understanding that is helpful to get that we cannot accomplish our own benefit. Full stop. We cannot accomplish our own benefit. The fundamental problem from a Buddhist perspective is that the primary cause of suffering amongst sentient beings is attachment to who we think we are. As long as everyone supports us in who we think we are, we suffer the illusion that we really are that thing. But of course, in real life, not everyone confirms us on a regular basis, so we lose track of who we are. And that pains us. So then we try harder, which is a mistake. So in the practice of Chenrezig, therefore, we may also make a kind of funny mistake with it, which is not necessarily immediately obvious. And that mistake is to think I'm going to engage in the practice of Chenrezig in order to become Chenrezig. That mistake is not a terrible mistake, but it's helpful to hold the fundamental view that we already are Chenrezig. So the issue isn't one of becoming Chenrezig, the issue is one of recognizing our fundamental nature as it already is. In one sense, that's much easier. But we don't believe that either. So we constantly find ways to put obstacles in front of ourselves. And we disguise the obstacles as kind of greasing the skids, making it easier and better. So that is fundamental. If you need to make a note, you could write down, already am. So we have a little problem also with the identification as Chenrezig. The identification itself is an issue. It's not that there's anything wrong with Chenrezig or that we're not Chenrezig. It's more like the identification itself becomes a problem. How dare you contradict me? Do you know who you're talking to? This is Chenrezig. So we have a problem, like just immediately. The idea here is that we actually were never off track. It was just some subtle thing that kept us from getting it. So now we have to, against our better judgment, hold the view that we actually are Chenrezig. The starting point is the finish line. You should rejoice. The finish line is a long ways away. This is very difficult. So we practice and practice over and over and over. We engage in the practice over and over and over and over, constantly. And it's helpful to remind ourselves the reason that we practice over and over and over is not because we are not Chenrezig, but because we consistently get in the way. I don't see it, I don't experience, I don't know it, all these things are there. So think about the various steps. The steps that we sometimes skip in here actually hold a great secret. So partly I say that because you wake up when I say it holds a great secret. We're coming to a great secret. But it's also true. So you have your Chenrezig texts. Anyone not have their text? You must have the text. Okay. On page 1. So if you're not clear about it, if you open it to the first page, you will see off to the right-hand side of the page, in a kind of an iconic design there with the number 1 in it. If you see that, you now know how to count pages in the text. That's important. You see at the top of that page, the top always being, of course, we have these long pages which come from an ancient tradition where all these things were printed on wood blocks that were carved by hand. So now, of course, we take them down to the printer and they copy them for us. I don't know if we lose merit by that or what, but anyway, we're in the right place. The first thing is the prayer to the lamas of the Mahamudra lineage. No mention of Chenrezig. On this first prayer, the prayer to the lamas of the Mahamudra lineage, let us first ask, what is the Mahamudra lineage? The Mahamudra itself is the highest practice and the highest realization. Like to accomplish Mahamudra is to attain complete Buddhahood. So the first thing we look at is, what does the end look like? We can't actually see it because it's not a thing. But we can experience it and see it in the mind's eye. So if we don't see it, it's because we haven't yet kind of purified our vision, you might say. So we start with the prayer to the lamas of the Mahamudra lineage, which is to say, we are so grateful to have the teachings in Mahamudra and to have examples of those who exemplify it, who manifest it. Because it's not uncommon when you meet someone who does that you recognize it through your own mind. So you have an experience. The experience is everything. The conceptual understanding is kind of like the stepladder that you use to reach that bottle on the top shelf. The stepladder is of no use to you except to reach that bottle. So likewise, the prayer to the lamas of the Mahamudra lineage is a stepladder. What we want is the Mahamudra. So we begin by something that I want to say is our endless, every waking moment and every sleeping moment, we are constantly training our minds. So we have a series of teachings called the mind training, which many of you are familiar with. But if we step away just from the teachings of that, we can see that mind training is an endless, beginningless event. Every time we think something, our mind is changed by the thought. Isn't it? I mean, does anyone doubt that? Every time I see someone and say, "Oh, you look so well today and happy," changes my mind. They think it, and it changes their mind. So we are constantly feeding into ourselves and to each other. Constantly. Don't think that it's only when we're aware of it. It's actually even more potent sometimes when we're not aware of it. So once again, in terms of like a funnel condensing the entire teachings of Buddhism, we could say this is actually what the whole thing is about. How do we train our minds to recognize the truth of our own mind, the truth, the relative truth of the importance of working for the benefit of others, because that's how I recognize my own benefit. Otherwise, I just become attached. Attachment and aversion are, in the context of this tradition, fundamentally our enemies. Until the point where they become friends. We have to always say that. So the prayer to the lamas of the Mahamudra lineage is a way of announcing to ourselves how important it is to have met these great teachers, some of them still living, some of them we knew when they were alive, but they're not living now, and there are others on their way. We do not have a chance of encountering these teachings without individuals who have at least partially realized them. So we give rise to a sense of appreciation that we have encountered it, that we are doing it, that we're working on it. And when we do that, just like when somebody gives you something and you say, "I so appreciate that you gave me that, that's so helpful," your mind changes in the moment of these just ordinary stuff. So here it's extraordinary because you cannot go and buy this in the supermarket. The only way to get it is to get it from someone who has it, and it's not a thing to get. So, in other words, you will never find it if you go and look for it. You have to instead do certain things that bring about a ripening that otherwise will not happen. So we start by reciting the prayer to the lamas of the Mahamudra lineage. So the prayer actually, on the surface, not particularly inspiring. It's a list of names. So probably you don't know very many of them and haven't met very many of them, but you may have met 2 or 3 of them. It's not important that we meet them. It's important that we recognize the value. So in the beginning, we don't know anything, we fake it. Because we've met many things in our lives which were valuable, and we didn't know they were valuable until later. Just like we've met many things that we thought were good and then found out not so good. So in this case, we find out how good it is by virtue of sort of praising those individuals. So we will now, if you go to page 1, carries us up through page 6, and we will recite this text with the help of Melinda. In Tibetan, yes, the names won't mean so much in English anyway, and they sound better in Tibetan, so we go for the sound. Right?
Oi kya dak dorje chon chen chen no te lo shira sang po chen no naro jana siddhi chen no marpa chuki lodru chen no mila shepa doje chen no dak po da jonu chen no pa den do sun ken pa chen no si tu drogun rechen ken no pom drak sonam doje chen no du chen gama pagji chen no Edru bargen chen po chen no sempa rangjong dorje chen no yawa yung tun chen po chen no Zamlin chuki drakpa chen no Tok den kachu wang po chen no Chujin dejin shepa ken no Jetsun ratna badra chen no Ruku tongwa dunden chen no Kun ken jamba zambo chen no Jam sempa jo dundru chen no Yawang judra yam so chen no
Rashi Bajo
no Zome
Mekyu
Dorje no Yawa kuncho genwa no Jetsun wangju dorje no Garwan chuki wangju no Gyacho chuyin dorje no Paden yeshe keno, jetsun dudo, dorje keno, me pam chudru, jam sor keno, pema ninje, wang bo keno, pa chu ke dorje keno, yase lo dru taye keno, kunzon ka kya dorje keno, pema wanjo gyabo keno, palden kense oze keno, ranjun rekpe dorje keno, nruwan norbu don drugeno, yada granjun kon gyageno, bukadorje changwangeno, drenchen sawe lama keno, yedam kilko lakso keno, chukyong magon janrel keno, dakso drodru senchen gongma, tukse yeshe chenboy zigne, chakchene lu tuparzoji.
So now we have refuge, which we did earlier, but now we do it again. So I'm going to just quickly read through it in English, which you can follow, and I will have a few comments, and then we'll come back and we'll recite it in Tibetan together, and maybe you can kind of hold the sense of it while we recite that. It's not necessary to recite it in Tibetan, but we're entertaining ourselves. So we start. It says, from this moment until the heart of enlightenment is reached, I and all sentient beings, equaling the limits of space. So we can stop there for a moment. In this case, because of the aspiration bodhicitta, the wish to benefit all sentient beings, we imagine again in front of us, extending to the very limits of space, all sentient beings. All sentient beings. They are there. So anyway, we know that we can't actually conceive of how many beings there are. As Kala Rinpoche used to say, there are uncountable beings. When you just lift a rock up in the woods and look underneath, you can't count how many beings are there. And that's just the ones you see. So we think of all sentient beings, thinking of their benefit. We are going for refuge. So we're up to equaling the limits of space. So we imagine this, unlimited beings. Turn the page. We go for refuge to the glorious holy lamas. Here we are explicitly turning our minds from all of our ordinary refuges in the world to refuge in a source which we take to be a potential aid in actually turning our minds towards something beyond our ordinary activities. So we go for refuge to the glorious holy lamas. We go for refuge to the yidams. These are the deities in this tradition, the deities of the mandala. So a mandala is like a circle. Literally it means a circle, but in this case it kind of means a particular environment where they are, or for example, we have a mandala here. We call this a mandala as a group of practitioners, a sangha, a group of people who practice together. That also is the mandala of that sangha. So we go for refuge to the yidams, the deities, the mandala. Not so important to know all the details of those things. You have at least 100 years to figure that out. We go for refuge to the Buddhas, the transcendent conquerors. So that is who the Buddhas are. They conquered the causes of suffering and became liberated from those causes. So we call them the transcendent conquerors. We go for refuge to the sacred Dharma. We go for refuge to the noble Sangha. That's us, almost. So the noble Sangha are those individuals like ourselves who have actually accomplished the Dharma, at least to some significant extent. But usually when we're talking about those who have a really quite a large extent. So we go for refuge to the noble Sangha. Then we go for refuge to the assembly, and you don't need to really know what these words reference here at this point, but we go for refuge to the assembly of Dakas, Dakinis, Dharma protectors, and guardians who possess the eye of intrinsic awareness. Then on page 11, until enlightenment, I take refuge in the... What happened here?
Sorry, that's just
Right. Until enlightenment, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the excellent assembly. That's the Sangha. Through the merit of generosity and other virtues, may I accomplish Buddhahood for the benefit of beings. So really you can think of this as an extension of the aspiration bodhicitta, which is so critical. So we'll go to the beginning of the refuge prayer and recite that in Tibetan up to page 11.
Oi Dandro Wanam Keta Dan Yampe Sem Chen Tam Che Dudine Zong Te Ji Si Jang Chu Ning Pola Chi Ki Palden Lama Dampa Nam La Kya Sujyo Yidam Kil Korji Latso Nam La Kya Sujyo Sanje Chomden Nam La Kya Dambe Chu Nam La Kya Sujyo Bagbe Gendu Nam La Kya Sujyo Pawo Kandro Chu Chong Song Me Tso Ye ki shendan demba namla kya su cho palden lama dampa namla kya su cho idam kilkorji latso namla kya su cho sanje chonden de namla kya su cho dampe chu namla kya su cho pabe gendu namla kya su cho mawo kandro chuchon sometso yeshe ki shendan demba namla kya su cho palden lama damba namla kya su cho idam kilkorji latso namla kya su cho sanje chonden de namla kya su cho dampe chu namla kya su cho pakpe gendu namla kya su cho pawo kandra chuchon sometso yeshe ki shendan demba namla kya su cho sanje chudan soki choknamla janchu badu dani kya su chi dagi jen soji pe sonam hidrola penche sanje rupashok sanje chudan soki chonamla janchu badu dani kya su chi dagi jen soji pe sonam hidrola penche sanje rupashok sanje chudan soki chonamla janchu badu dani kya su chi dagi jen soji pe sonam hidrola penche sanje rupashok.
These pieces are recited numerous times, and some people even recite these prayers for many thousands of times, and it underscores the importance of the foundation, the practice of Chenrezig and the other practices require a certain foundation in order to be really helpful. So reciting these, whether in English or Tibetan, whatever your wish is helpful to build a foundation. Shall we have another short break or continue? Continue? So now we're on page 12. The title of on page 12 is Generating the Visualization. Now, intentionally, rather than learning how to generate the visualization, I prefer this morning that you have the actual experience of it. So I'm going to read, first of all, the visualization generation once in English, and we'll have a few hopefully elucidating comments, and then we'll do it together. So first of all, it says, on the crown of myself and sentient beings. On the crown of myself and sentient beings. So yourself, you know what that is. And sentient beings here means that vast number, uncountable number of sentient beings, filling space to the limits of space itself. On the crown of myself and sentient beings, pervasive as space, is a lotus and a moonseed. So on the crown of myself and sentient beings is a lotus and a moonseed. So the lotus here is visualized as kind of a seat. It's kind of the open flower on the just slightly above the crown of your head. Pervasive of space is a lotus and moon seat. The moon seat is a flat disk. It's a flat disk that is not two-dimensional, it's three-dimensional. It's like the moon, as if it was sort of flattened and still perfectly round. And it also radiates the kind of specific white color of the moon. And it's just slightly three-dimensional. I hesitate to put a number on it, but I'll just go ahead and say, it's like maybe half an inch or something like that. It's not thick like a pillow or anything. It's just a white disc, and it sits on that lotus on the crown of the head. Then it says, on the crown of the lotus, moon seat. From the Hri. Now what it's referring to, you see from the Hri in English? From the Hri. So the Hri is actually it's a Sanskrit letter. And we're not going to, I know, it's right there. It's on page 12, and it's off to the left. If you see it on the bottom of the page, there's a little thing that says from the Hri, and above the from is the HRI, which points to the Hri, which is above that. So normally you visualize that, but not to worry about that this morning. The Hri is there, which is actually the more important thing. To visualize it as something, but we can also substitute a small glowing sphere, like about the size of a lentil. And that small glowing sphere hovers above that moon seat. You got it? It's a sphere. So in time, we'll fill it in. So from that Hri, from the sphere, appears the noble Chenrezig. Okay? Now we maybe don't know what Chenrezig looks like yet, so we're coming to that. But from that Hri, it appears in stages. So we're just shortening it, but actually it's okay to shorten it because that also is one of the ways that this practice is done. There's also more elaborate ways in which it's done. And we sometimes say, I always say, the right way to do it is the one you use. It's kind of like the dentist who says the best toothbrush is the one you use. And so this is really like, if you use that, that's what works for you, that's the best thing. And in time, you can elaborate it. So from the Hri appears the noble Chenrezig, clear, white, and radiating 5-colored light. So Chenrezig, you can look on the front of your text and see Chenrezig. It's there in a kind of steel blue with a white background. So not everything is there to see, but that's what Chenrezig appears on the crown of your head. Clear white and radiating 5-colored lights. We'll come back to that. Chenrezig, smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. That's important. Smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. So again, I want to bring this thing about the direct experience. When you think of Chenrezig, who's a little bit of an odd creature to us, with multiple arms and all of these things, but when you think of someone smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes, you know that you're in the right place when you have the experience of someone gazing at you with compassionate eyes. It feels safe, it feels good, it feels positive, helpful. So that's the feeling that we're meant to get when we think of Chenrezig, smiling and gazing with compassionate eyes. The first pair of his 4 hands, so he has 4 hands. We'll elaborate this a bit. The first pair of his 4 hands are joined together. So they're just joined together like this. The lower 2, so he's got 4. There's kind of the upper 2 and the lower 2. The first pair of his 4 hands are joined together. The lower 2 hold a crystal mala. Adorned with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. Now there's more there than what is said, but it's, even if you didn't do any more than that, you're on the way. So, to go back through it again, his 4 hands represent 4 things, what we call the 4 immeasurables. Those 4 immeasurables are loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. The important thing here is not so much the 4 hands or the 4 arms, but the sense that this being is actually the embodiment of those four immeasurables. And they're called immeasurable because the foundation they rest on is complete equanimity. So that loving kindness, compassion, and joy is focused on all sentient beings without a single exception. So it's ultimate equanimity. Not just your friends, not just good people. It's actually more important to focus it on those who appear to not be so good. Because again, you cannot accomplish your own benefit. So the lower two hold a crystal mala. The crystal mala he holds in his right hand. The crystal mala represents something that's very important. We call it magnetizing. It's magnetizing. The crystal mala is a symbol of something. So, a symbol is something that points to something other than itself. Right? We have to understand that meaning of the symbol. Otherwise, we get lost in this thing. We might even get into a dispute about it. It is not merely a symbol. Now, it actually, in this case, it points to something other than itself. The crystal mala points to Chenrezig's ability to draw people out of the depths, the mire that they live in, their attachment, their aversion, their anger, their jealousy, their greed, their pride, all of the things that could bring about suffering. The mala is the symbol that points to Chenrezig's ability to draw beings, to magnetize beings out of that mire. I want to move along here, so I'm going to just keep going. And these things can be filled in later. It's not possible to get them all in one day anyway. So, down the line, we have adorned with jewels and silk. He wears a deerskin upper garment. So inevitably, somebody asks, who killed the deer? And then somebody always adds, it's roadkill. So rewind back to where we were before we said that. The deerskin is also, it's a symbol. It points to something other than itself. Generally speaking, we might all agree that when we see deer in the forest, we have a sense of peacefulness, that they have a certain reputation for being peaceful animals. They're not predators, and so we have a certain sense of peacefulness. In this case, that the deerskin upper garment, which is over his left shoulder, represents the ability let me rephrase that slightly. It points to a level of peacefulness which is palpable, which is so clear and so still that conflict cannot survive in that context. And so the result is that that deer is also kind of mythologically drawn to conflict. And the mere presence of that deer coming into the conflict cannot survive. It's like heat on the mirror in the morning when the steam vaporizes. When it's warm, it cannot stay there. So the conflict vanishes. So that's fundamentally the meaning of that deer. And that also can be elaborated, but we're trying to get an overview here. So again, just to read it one time, let's read it one time in English, starting on page 12 with Hri, but in English. From the Hri appears the noble Chenrezig, white and radiating five-colored light, compassionate eyes, the first pair of his 4 hands are joined together. The lower 2 hold a crystal mala and a white lotus. And with jewels and silk, he wears a deerskin upper garment. His head ornament is Amitabha, and his 2 legs sit in the Vajra asana. A stainless moon supports his back. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge. So sorry about not bringing that in previously, but anyway, here it is. His head ornament is Amitabha. This refers, if you look at the picture of Chenrezig, you can see it on his head. No, not there, right? What? Oh, yeah. There's Chenrezig, and on the very top, there is the very top that's between the, what do you call the fabric that surrounds it. There is a red figure there, and that red figure is the Buddha Amitabha. Right? Okay. So his head ornament is on Amitabha. This does not mean that it's an inanimate object. This actually refers to the Buddha Amitabha actually being present there on the crown of Chenrezig's head. And his 2 legs, Chenrezig's, sit in the Vajra asana, which means what we sometimes call the lotus position, for sitting with the legs crossed in a certain way. A stainless moon supports his back. He is the embodiment and essence of all sources of refuge. That is to say, all the Buddhas, all the great teachers, all the realized ones who are on the way to being enlightened but not enlightened yet. Amitabha is a special Buddha in the Vajrayana. So now I'm going to tell you one sort of baffling thing, because I know how you love to be baffled. And this tradition is replete with bafflement. Amitabha is Chenrezig's guru. Amitabha is Chenrezig's teacher. In addition, Chenrezig is an emanation of Amitabha. In other words, not exactly an ordinary being. Now, in this text, don't get confused. The emanation does not occur at the point where you get to this text. The emanation is just part of the practice from the very beginning. Whenever you see Chenrezig in any text, in any painting or anything, Chenrezig is always the emanation of Amitabha. So you might think, accurately, that an emanation of Amitabha must also, in some sense, be Amitabha. It's kind of like, in a certain way, you give birth to a child, that child is also you. It's not completely separate. It may physically appear separate, but the connection between the two is extraordinarily strong, just in our world of things. In this case, the two are like that. They're absolutely connected, inseparable, Amitabha, and Chenrezig. So they kind of do the same job in a certain way, just speaking kind of casually. They kind of trade places back and forth sometimes. And both of them are really doing the same work. So one of the things here is that it is said that ordinary beings cannot easily relate to a Buddha, like in person relate to a Buddha. Not so easy. Like, what if you encountered the Buddha Amitabha? Translucent, ephemeral, not exactly really there, but also not there, radiating light, and so on. These things might cause you to run for your life. So the Buddha appears in a form which can be related to. So here we have Chenrezig, who appears. The idea here is that Chenrezig appears like a saint to beings in a form that you can relate to. So some Chenrezigs actually appear almost exactly like a human being, and others appear with the four arms and all of the accoutrements that are there. And for that reason, we practice the sadhana of Chenrezig, so that we have the ability to relate to things which are not easy to relate to from our ordinary perspective. So when you put all of these pieces together, you can kind of get a sense that each of the pieces plays a part, kind of like a jigsaw puzzle. Every piece is required, but you don't require all the pieces in order to get the picture. So now we come to this place, before we take a break, the homage to Chenrezig. This is very important. So I like to say it this way. Imagine that you did this practice, and when you got to the homage, you weren't really planning to do an homage. You didn't really have a sadhana in front of you. You were just engaging in the practice, going through the visualizations, and at some point you actually realized that Chenrezig was on the crown of your head. You actually had that experience, that Chenrezig was on the crown of your head. Now at that moment, you would want to do something other than your ordinary things. You would want to do something special. And that's where the homage comes in. So the homage is the special thing that you do, recognizing that having gone through this ritual, Chenrezig is actually present on the crown of your head. You go through this little short liturgy here, and with the best of your ability, be present with the experience. Imagine that. I mean, that would be remarkable if you engaged in it and actually had the experience of the deity on the crown of your head, whether you thought those things were cool or not. It would be a remarkable experience, and you would want to do something. You would want to hold it. You'd want to get something from it or give something to it. You would be puzzled, perhaps, or perhaps inspired in a way which left you speechless. So that's the idea. You come to the homage, and we recite the homage, first in English, but actually it's really beautiful to recite in Tibetan. But we'll say it once in English and twice in Tibetan, okay?
Noble one, untainted
by the mire, your form is luminous white. A perfect awakened one adorns your head. With eyes of compassion you gaze upon beings. To Chenrezig we bow.
Jogo kanji mago kudo karzo sanje chi ula je
Sanje Chi
Ulajen
Tuje Chenji Drolazi Chenrezig Michael.
Since we're here at this point, if you can memorize this very short homage, this also, with the exception of one word, is also a food offering. So then you can recite this as a food prayer before you eat anything actually. Even if it's just a single grain of rice, you can recite this prayer. And basically you're making an offering to Chenrezig, not of the food, but what the food does. The food makes it possible for you to benefit all sentient beings. And so you make the offering of your life and all things to Chenrezig on behalf of all sentient beings. So it's okay to give thanks for the food too, but also keep the more profound insight. Okay, I think we need to take a little short break.